Very welcome to the Swedish House of Finance. My name is Per Wisén. I work here at the House of Finance and I will moderate this morning's discussion on artificial intelligence. For those of you who have never been here before, the Swedish House of Finance, we share these premises with the Department of Finance at the Stockholm School of Economics. So here we do teaching, research, we have databases for the whole of Sweden, we have PhD courses for the whole of Sweden, and we do what we call outreach, which is what we're doing now. We try to gather people from the private sector, the public sector, and academia to discuss some topic. And today we are very happy to have this distinguished panel with representatives of these three sectors. And I thought we'll start by letting them introduce themselves. Michael, please. And we share the microphone.
Warm welcome also from my side. My name is Michael Halling, and I'm an associate professor of finance at the Stockholm School of Economics, and also a research fellow at the Swedish House of Finance. I think I'm here because my background is obviously in finance, but I also have a PhD in computer science. So ultimately, after many years, finally those two areas are now moving together, and I'm excited also about the future, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, my name is Stefan Johansson. I'm from Handelsbanken. I'm a chief digital officer, and I think I'm here because my background is actually not from finance. I've been in the IT and telecom industry for 20 years, and then joined Handelsbanken 2 years ago in this role to drive digitalization in the bank, but also make sure that we have a good view on what's happening, especially with emerging technologies that we'll discuss today.
Hi, my name is Sami Taki. I work in consulting at a firm called Oliver Wyman. I work in the financial services practice, and you could say that I have two legs at Oliver Wyman. One leg is what we call finance and risk, so working with CFO and CRO topics for the major banks, and the other leg is exactly this, machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm a computer scientist by training, so this to me feels like the revenge of the geeks, which is really fun. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Steve?
I'm Stefan Johansson from the Swedish Financial Supervisory Authority. I had the Innovation Center there, and I'm also working on conduct supervision, so I meet a lot of the new phenomena in the market. I also, as my fellow panelists, have a background from computer science, so I'm sort of the odd one in the authority.
And I have sent out 3 questions to this panel in advance, so they can sort of try focus on those. And the first one is will artificial intelligence be a game changer? Will it change the products in the market? Will it change the firms in the market? Is this the end of universal banking? Will we see lots of boutique firms taking over with different products than the ones we are used to? And might it change regulation and supervision? RegTech is one of the buzzwords going around. So that's the first question. And the second question we sent out was, why did AI become big now rather than 10 or 15 or 20 years ago? And the third question is sort of, how is Sweden doing? Is Sweden at the forefront of this? I think that's claimed now and then. Is that true? And in that case, maybe why, and can we improve? So I've sent these questions to you. And they will do a first round of comments, 5 minutes each. But we will start with the thing you see on the screen here, something called Mentimeter. We do it now and then to have your view before we start. So if you take up your phones and go to a web page called menti.com and insert the code there, then you can answer the 3 questions. Will AI change the game in the financial sector in the sense of changing the products, strongly agree to the right, strongly disagree to the left, the firms, regulation, and supervision? And you see they are moving in real time. We see, as you do it, 18 people have answered so far. And they seem to believe that this give this 2 minutes and see. I'm afraid the panel will have to sort of turn your heads to see what's going on. There seems to be maybe a stronger belief that the products will change rather than the firms and regulation and supervision. 32 people have answered. Anybody still? Okay. So let's leave it there. 5.7 on a scale of, I'm new to this, 7 or 7. Think the products will change. It's a game changer for the products that are supplied by the financial sector. 5.3, slightly weaker. Believe that the firms will change, but still sort of more above the median. And 5 believe that regulation and supervision will change. Thank you very much for that. Now we will see what the panel thinks about the same questions. And Michael has promised to start.
Okay, so welcome again from my point of view. In the next 5 minutes, I will just very briefly share a couple of thoughts on AI in finance. These slides are way too detailed to sort of discuss them in those 5 minutes, so I will just set a couple of emphasis points. If you have any further questions, maybe we come back to those in the discussion or obviously afterwards. I think it's interesting to kind of think about this rise of AI in the broader context of fintech. So there's a lot of things going on right now in this intersection of technology and finance, and artificial intelligence is one of the dimensions. I think it fits mostly into methodological innovation. These are new techniques and new tools that obviously are not standalone, but they interact with other areas in the fintech sphere, such as automation, technological innovation, and big data. And I will come back a little bit more to these interactions later on. I think it's also with one of those topics where everybody talks about it and there's a big hype, but it's not always so clear what it really means. So I thought I'll give a brief classification of some of the techniques on a very high level. Basically, there's 2 techniques in AI. One is called unsupervised learning, and the other one is called supervised learning. They're very different target outcomes and goals. If we talk about the algorithms that do unsupervised learnings, they're basically tools to reduce dimensionality of complex and big data. So you can think about these techniques as basically pattern recognition, clustering of data. In terms of old style techniques, it's similar to a principal components analysis where you try to boil down complex data to a single measure or a simpler data structure. Supervised learning on the other end, on the other side, are tools or are techniques that are targeted towards prediction. So that's a key area in artificial intelligence. So in supervised learning, you have a training data set where you also observe an outcome variable, and you allow the algorithm to basically learn relationships, potentially very complex relationships between some characteristics, some explanatory variables, and outcome variables. And the target is to predict the outcome, not just in the training sample, but also out of sample, so when there's new data coming up. And artificial intelligence has been shown to work very well in certain applications in those prediction applications. Now, if we come to this topic of whether artificial intelligence is going to change the game, then of course also from an academic perspective, there's discussion whether it's going to revolutionize how we think about economics and financial economics. I think if you look into the papers that have been published in this area, most are centered exactly around these 2 topics that I just mentioned when I talked about the techniques. So either it's about extraction of measures from new data sources, which could be text documents, could be pictures, could be voice recordings. So that's again done through these unsupervised learning algorithms. And there's several applications where people have studied the predictive power of artificial intelligence systems. What I think is important to highlight in this context is that AI techniques are not very good at helping us to understand the world. Okay? So they are black boxes. Usually it's very hard to diagnose where exactly the predictive power of an AI system is actually coming from. To kind of look inside the box. There's currently some developments going on in the computer science front to make this more accessible, but I think that's still ongoing research. So I think if the idea is to understand better what are the economic mechanisms driving some relationships, identifying ideally causal relationships between some variables and outcome, variables, AI is not going to help us much. And the final topic that I would like to bring up here is there's a discussion about algorithmic fairness nowadays in the academic literature, which is about that algorithms might bring in some discrimination against groups that ex ante we already agreed on that we don't want to discriminate against through the flexibility of the algorithm. That could be because the data reflects those discriminatory effects. And if you use the data to train the algorithm, then the algorithm is going to inherit those discriminatory effects. Otherwise, the algorithm could also replicate variables that we exclude from analysis, such as gender and race, for example, where we want to make creditworthiness decisions. But then the algorithm might sort of put those variables together as very complex combinations of other variables. And there have been studies that document that in the end that's sort of, for example, happening if you take US data and decisions on mortgages and assessments of creditworthiness, that suddenly these algorithms start to discriminate against races, even though race as a variable is not in the data set. So that's, I think, something interesting to think about. And to kind of conclude with my last two comments, one is, of course, if we extend AI and think about automation, are AI systems flexible and powerful enough that they can replace human beings making decisions? I think predictive power is one dimension, but I think an obvious point is that we should also think about the cost of mistakes. And there's going to be a trade-off made in terms of assessing or predicting what kind of profession is going to be automated in the future. And the last point, given that we don't want to sort of waste time here on these presentations, but just sort of stimulate some discussion, is about the why now principle, as Per said, this why now question. As Per said, I think it's interesting to observe that now this takes off so strongly, given that the algorithms that are currently at the heart of these tools have been developed in the 90s. So the voice recognition in Alexa and similar systems are based, as I say here, on stuff that has been published in 1991 and 1997. So that's 20 years ago, and now it's taking off. And I think it's interesting a little bit to reflect on what could be sources for this. Thank you.
We can come back to that question. Stefan, please.
Yeah, thanks for this good overview. And as you already said, I mean, I think we need more than 1 hour for each of your slides, which I think is you have to understand that the complexity of this topic is nothing that you can solve within 5 minutes. But to come a little back to your question, how much will it be a game changer or not? And I strongly believe it will be a game changer. But I think what will change the game is not AI per se or the technology itself, but everything that has to happen around to bring it to life. Because, I mean, we all know that data is, of course, the key essence of running these algorithms using AI, but data isn't the thing that is clearly and nicely available in the most companies. So just to clean up your data stack and know what kind of data you have, when is it accessible, what does it really say, I think is one big part that will have a huge impact for the companies. That has to happen. The other thing is that in all the AI projects or discussions we're having, it usually starts with a very deep discussion about what actually is your problem. What is the problem here? What is the process? So also where the whole AI discussion is more an enabler or a driver for the business discussion, which even if you don't start with a project, create a lot of value for the business side, just to have this sparring partner from the technology side to ask the right questions and to assess the process view. So, and that's why my personal view is that, of course, all these different technologies from natural language processing over to machine learning and so on, I think these you have to be able to understand those different possibilities with these different technologies, but the main impact it will have when you have the discussion with the business side on understanding what kind of solution helps you in which area. And once again, from our perspective, or what we've seen so far, usually the technology itself is the smallest part in the solution. It's everything around, from your culture, the leadership, responsibilities, availability of data, which have probably a bigger impact, and I would say especially in this industry, and I mean coming from the telecom industry, my personal view is that the level of automation or easy digitization isn't that high in this industry if you compare to other industries like the car industry, like media, like telco. So I think here also this whole hype around artificial intelligence is really a driver to tackle all these automation things and then come with maybe an RPA or whatever kind of solution it is to the problem, where people at the beginning say, well, can you solve this with AI? And then in the discussion you realize that AI is not the solution here. So coming back to the main question, I think AI will definitely be a game changer, but not AI itself, but in the bigger context, the things and the discussions you're having to make AI happen. Then the question why it happens right now, and I think these, two things, like you said, the technology itself or the theory behind it is pretty old, but now we have, of course, the availability of data and we have the computing power, which makes all that happen. And with everybody running around with their smartphones as a supercomputer in our pockets, creating even more data, putting it into context. So I think this is now the perfect ground for making all these theories happen and create value, but also raise all these, like you said, more these ethical questions, regulative questions, transparency questions, what these black boxes, what is really happening in them. And I think this is one of the reasons why our approach to AI is really more called it like augmented intelligence, where we are trying to use these technologies to help our people, but not let the machine take the final decision. And this is also where how we are really positioning this, and this is the projects that we are driving. We are not using this to push something directly out towards our customers. We do this to help our employees to make better decisions, to sort things out, to help them. Now we were having a very successful project with natural language processing, to help them understand, make sense of all the documents that we are producing. Once again, as a support to the people, so that they take the final decision and not the machine take the final decision. So that's our perspective and also the reason why it happens. And then coming to this regulatory aspect, I think absolutely it is necessary to have a close view on what should be allowed and what not. Because I mean, from a technological perspective, you could do all kinds of things with this data. You could predict who will divorce, who will get cancer. I mean, there's a lot of potential value in this data, which you can find out via algorithms. But the question is, is this really the right way to use it? And that's why I think it's extremely important that we have some clear rules of what is allowed and what should not be allowed, so that we don't end up in the same situation like the media industry and the big companies in the US right now, where a lot of questions are arising. What are their algorithms doing? And do they actually know themselves what they are doing or not? And what kind of ways are they to misuse all these algorithms if you understand them better than the people that created them? And I'm sure we don't want to end up like this in the finance industry. That's why I think it really is necessary to put some clear rules on. But this needs, of course, people who understand this stuff. And I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges, that we do not have enough people who really understand what is the potential, what are the risks with this, how do you try to evaluate, how do you try to test things in a safe environment, to make your big decisions based on experience and based on these learnings. And this is, I think, is true for all the big companies here, or the big players in the finance industry, but of course also for the regulator, where I think we need a close interaction.
Thank you very much. Sam?
Yeah. I will try not to repeat, but I agree. This will be a game changer. I also agree with the ranking of the audience, which I think products was the highest, and then firms, and then regulation supervision. And just to comment quickly on each of those three. On products, I think most people think about client-facing products. I'm convinced that the biggest case is in what I call internal products. So it's producing tools to people working in the organization. We've talked about data. There are so many things you can do with new technology on data cleaning, on data reconciliation, that will add tremendous value to firms and banks in particular. There are a lot of things you can do with credit decisioning and risk assessments. There are some banks are giving their salespeople tools now when they go and meet clients, and this tool tells them this is the agenda that you should have in this meeting, because I've looked at all of the meeting history and I've looked at the sort of media mentions, and I think they need these products and they need to change it, the financial structure in this way, and this is what is on top of the agenda. So I think internal products we shouldn't forget about, because I think that's where the biggest cases are. And when it comes to customer-facing products, I see this as a spectrum where you have some sort of maturity spectrum, and we're still at a sort of chatbot stage. And I think 10 years from now, people will look back at 2018 and say, did they call that AI? There are, we've also talked a little bit about fintechs. There are some fintechs that are doing very interesting things, but I think, it's not super difficult to be a fintech today. When I meet with the fintechs, they say, I just put AI in the subject and I will get meetings with investors and with clients.
Or blockchain. Blockchain is even better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think there will be a sort of cleanup process in the coming 1 to 3 years. So those are some perspectives on products. The other was on firms. Again, I think fintechs, they have a long journey ahead of them. We haven't talked about the tech firms. There's one company called Ant Financial that many people in this part of the world haven't heard about. It's an Alibaba company. It's valued at $150 billion, which is this valuation of HSBC. Yeah? And all these big tech firms, they have resources and they want to break into this area, and they have the sort of technical know-how, and they take all of the talent. So I think those players we shouldn't forget about. And when it comes to the financial services firms, in many of these trends that have happened, you can, so infrastructure is one example. You can say, we are a small firm, so we don't have to make big investments. We'll still have better infrastructure than the big firms. That's not the case in AI. So if you're bigger, you have more resources and you will have an advantage. So looking at this from a sort of Swedish and Nordic perspective, the European banks, they have a much bigger advantage. That can also sort of lead to a shift in the sort of advancements we see in this area. And on supervision and regulation. So, if you read the regulation literally, it gives you a lot of room to use whichever methodologies you like in theory. In practice, I think you need to, or you have to convince the supervisor that you're using methodologies that are robust, that are auditable, that are traceable, etc. So I think this is more a supervision issue rather than regulatory issue. There's one exception, I think, and that's the shadow banking, where you can deal with money and we can be in the financial services space, but you're not regulated. And those firms are growing much faster than the banks. And if you combine them, they are becoming a pretty systematic risk. So, is that an area that should be regulated? Question mark.
Okay, thank you, Stig.
Thank you. And also trying not to repeat my fellow panelists here. I do think that the impact of AI will be substantial for a long perspective in the financial sector. I think that we can sort of take a parallel back to when the .com boom happened. There was a lot of hype around it. I think that we're in that hype now concerning AI. But in the long perspective, it did dramatically change the way we interact with corporations and with the society at large. Regarding the time frame on when this will happen is sort of much more unclear to say, and I think that a lot of the phenomena that we're seeing currently in the financial market they're quite basic. There are, as you mentioned, there are chatbots. There are sort of simple advice. They are made in some assessment in credit decisions, maybe to provoke negative, not enforcing positives in some cases. So they're very basic. From our perspective, when it becomes very interesting is when the capabilities in the future arises for AIs to interpret sort of natural language and to make an assessment. that is when it becomes sort of really interesting. And you mentioned that there is a rise in RegTech and also SupTech, which is sort of supervisory technology. I think a term established by the MAS in Singapore last year. I mean, these technologies aren't just relevant for firms, they're also relevant for us as authorities. And they might also be used in the future for supervisory activities and to monitor companies, to monitor the huge data sets that we collect from these firms in a more sophisticated manner than we do today. But it's a little early days for us, and I think that our main perspective right now is that firms that do go forward and implement new technologies as this one needs to be careful in the sense that they can't treat it as black boxes. Regulation won't allow that, and they need to be in control of what assessment this black box does and why, and they also need to be on top of the ethical perspectives. And I think that GDPR and Consumer Protection Regulation is quite clear on that, in the sense that the responsibility still lies with the management board and the board of directors, and it stops there. You can't blame an outsourced cloud provider delivering an AI solution to you, and it says that it made a decision on your behalf. Can't also outsource that responsibility. Regarding the question of why it rises today and not in the 90s, me being one of those who actually written code early millennium on neural networks, I think that, as my fellow panelists has said, it is sort of the perfect match of these different combinations. Back then, we didn't have the computational power, so making sort of neural networks to make actual assessment into, I mean, you can just go that many generations in the data sets. There weren't any computational power, and the simulation we did were very, very theoretical. But now we have vast amounts of computational power that makes these things actual and possible, and real life implementations. Will it change regulation? Probably. All massive changes in society do change regulation. If this has a massive impact, it will certainly change regulation also. But when regulation is created in the financial sector, we try to, and I'm not saying that we always succeed, but we try to make it as technology neutral as possible. We try to regulate the actual financial activity and not the implementation of it. And this is concerning AI, this is an implementation of financial activities. So in the sense that regulation describes actual behavior that might pose a conflict to a future implementation of, let's say, an AI making a credit assessment, that might impose that there might be some need for some slight adjustment into making it actual sort of technology neutral. But the regulation itself, I think, at large, could be the same. It might just sort of slightly need to change shape and form.
Okay, thank you. Now time for the rest of you to join the discussion or voicing opinions, whatever. While you think about it, let me try one. Since I phrased these questions, I talked about the financial sector. I mean, there are lots of different products in the financial sector. We have payments, we have asset management, we have mortgage lending, we have insurance. Sort of, can you see which will be more severely hit, to phrase it like that, by the new technologies, or will it be sort of evenly affected over the whole scale? Does anyone want to try that before I let Morten in? Stefan?
Well, I think if you look at AI specifically, I mean, I think technology has changed all of this, as you know. I mean, the payment, how we are paying nowadays is totally different than a couple of years ago, and it will be very different going forward. But this is maybe not that much based on AI. But if you more specifically look at AI, I think it will have an impact in in the decision making internally. And I also agree to you that I think that the biggest potential is probably not in the front end towards the customer. It's about all the internal processes that banks or financial institutions have to handle. And there, I think, once again, all these, if you look at the internal processes, how they are steered, what kind of systems we are using there, what kind of documents are created, revised, and so on. I think there AI has a huge potential to streamline this process, bring in algorithms as a support to take these decisions in a better way, get a broader perspective, finding structure in data, or make sense out of data. So I think there it will change a lot. The big question is, of course, how much of this will be visible towards the customer, and how much is this internal process improvements which make the banks faster and cheaper and more efficient.
So it will be more of a back office revolution, if I can use that kind of language.
I wouldn't say more. I think, to be honest, I think that the potential internally is bigger than towards towards the end customer. But I think you made a very good point, and this is the big question: how will these tech companies, the Amazons, the Googles, the Facebooks, and the Chinese players, how will they use their access to customers, the amount of data, the unregulated space that they're acting in? And that's why I don't think we need more regulation for the existing big players, but I think regulation has to have a good view on what kind of financial players these companies are becoming. And I think they will do it in a very smart way. And they will, of course, try to create as much as possible customer value out of that. And they don't have the same ethical standards as the financial sector has. And here, I think the biggest potential, but also the biggest threat is coming. That this technology is misused, and probably not misused on purpose. And once again, I think the Facebook thing is a good example for that. They didn't plan for that, what happened. It just happened because they don't really know what this technology is capable of. And if they now get a closer view, and we know that Amazon is going this way already, if they have a closer view now on which role they can play in the financial sector, starting with payments, with lending, and so on, I think there we really have to watch out what kind of consequences this will have. And we have to watch out before it happens. And that's why, coming back to your question, I think it will impact all of these areas, but it's mainly in the decision-taking area, where I think AI will have the biggest impact.
And hit rather uniformly, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. Morten Blix.
Yeah, so I wanted to come back to the question about the black box that some of you alluded to. I remember when I started at the Riksbank in the late 90s, we introduced more and more sophisticated econometric models to do inflation forecast. And if you had a forecast and you said that the inflation is going to be 2.3, and you have this wonderful model, and you couldn't explain why you got this number, you get thrown out the door. So humans, I think, have a basic, we need to understand why something comes out. So in what sense might this be an obstacle for the acceptance of these kind of forecasts or outcomes? And shouldn't we sort of put demand on these black boxes to give us some output? I mean, what is the essential components that led to this recommendation? Otherwise, I mean, how will we begin to the process of trusting these kind of black boxes?
Who? Sam?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So I think this is a big challenge, and I think everyone is aware of this challenge. And it's been used as an argument not to get into this space even. I always like to make the comparison to the medical field, because there's been AI has been used a lot in especially cancer treatment. And there was this famous case where the machine told the doctor, you need to give this combination of pills to the patient, and the doctor said, well, I don't understand how they combine what they do, so I'm not going to do it. And that's when a sort of new science was born. They tried to add basically rationale to the decisions. So the machine would come back and say, give this combination of pills, and these are the four or five or six reasons why. And then the doctor could say, agree, disagree with this point, and you need to remember this for next time. And then there was this big news when patients started to survive just because of this new technology. And this is now being implemented in the financial services sector as well, as we see. So there are tools that can explain the rationale, and then then the question becomes, what do you do with that information? So we have seen cases where the machine, I call the machine says, this is, for example, the decision you need to reject this credit application, and these are reasons why. And then you would sit there and say, no, I disagree. And then you would actually see that the machine had a point; it was just too complex. So even when you get these sort of this rationale, it's still a challenge to sort of implement it in the real world, so to speak.
Does anyone more want to comment?
Well, I think the use of these black boxes and the requirements we have on them is very much dependent on what kind of obvious value do they create. And if this black box, if everybody believes that this black box is creating a value and there's a need in the market to use it, I think the questions to understand what's happening inside will go down until something happens. And that's why, I mean, I think the pressure from the market from investors to create solutions to use this new technology to solve problems, I think is so high that some companies will not ask for the content of these black boxes. And we see this in image recognition. There are all kinds of examples where these black boxes or algorithms were able to analyze weapons and all that stuff. But if you don't really know how they work, they also can make a lot of mistakes. And that's where I like your pictures about the cost of mistake in there. And that's why I think the use of black boxes in the areas where the cost of mistake is very low will pop up. In other areas, I think we really have to watch out that we not let them take decisions that have a very high cost.
Yeah, so I think that was exactly also a point that I wanted to make. That I think it all depends a little bit on the application, and I think also following up on what Sam said, I think it also depends on how far you want to push this dimension of automation, right? Are you going to have a final decision maker who looks at the output and then basically assesses whether it makes sense according to his judgment or her judgment, or do you aim for full automation where the system really takes decisions and is only evaluated ex post? And then I think it also boils down to the regulation and regulatory requirements, I think, on some level. So I think there, from the earlier statements, to sort of extend this question a little bit, I heard some tension, right? If I think regulation says that you need to be tractable in many decisions and you need to kind of explain exactly how sort of decisions are made and how outcomes are delivered, then I do think that even if you have sophisticated tools of visualizing and reflect and sort of representing what's happening inside such an AI system, I think just by the pure idea of this technology, to not restrict it, to not enforce limitations, basically, to have it be very flexible, I think it's only going to get you that far. So I also wonder if that point of view of regulation is going to be relaxed in certain applications, that you say, look, if there is evidence that the predictive power is so high, even though we don't know exactly where it's coming from, that regulation is going to say, okay, we take a stand back because market wants this technology, it seems to work, even though we don't know exactly where it's going, we're still going to accept it. Or if regulation is going to put the brake and say, no, as long as we don't understand it, we don't want to trust it because we never know if something happens at some point in time in the future.
Okay, it's an interesting management problem. So when should the individual branch manager or doctor be allowed to overrule the smart system, and why not? And different firms could probably have different stance on that problem. Please.
So hi, my name is Philip. I am from the innovation agency Vinnova. I have a question regarding the actual cross-fertilization between different sectors. I've not heard that much here today, but do you do actual cooperation with, for example, the automotive industry or the life science industry regarding this field? For Stefan, for example? Yeah.
I mean, we're talking to them, and we're talking to a lot of companies within the IT sector Yeah, so I think, to be honest, I think that the IT companies are somehow the link between those different industries, at least at the moment. And with insurance, so we're having a pretty good network in this financial and insurance area, but to be honest, not that much with other companies, except that now like you said, all the big players are popping in here. I mean, of course, when you talk to Google, you're not talking to an IT supplier, you're also talking to one of the biggest media companies, and of course they automatically come with their good ideas and cool things that they did in the media space, and try to explain to you that this is what you should do as well. But I would say there's not really a good cooperation yet between the different industries. But I think you have a really good point, and that's why I think also a lot of people like me are somehow changing industry now. Yeah, coming from the experience in one industry to the other. But I think this so far is mainly based on the ordinary IT stack. Yeah, how do you handle IT? How do you handle the cooperation between IT and the business side? What kind of new business models? Questions does this digitalization thing put on the table? So I think this is more on that level where the link or the learnings from different industries is happening. I would say AI is probably, it's too young to have established that good cooperation yet.
Thanks.
Thank you. If you could send the microphone 2 rows back, I saw another hand in there.
Hi, Tobias Wellen from Handelsbanken. I'm interested in, or I hear you saying that AI will not make the decisions, but they will do it together with humans. How do you see that in 20 or 30 years when AI becomes much more intelligent and, the super, what do you call it? I'm referring to the book Life 3.0. You're aware? How do you see that? So, we're talking about AI and humans today. How do we see AI and computers tomorrow, maybe without human decisions?
Who wants to?
I can maybe start. So I think someone mentioned that there's, you have simple decisions with sort of low risk. They are already automated today, and they've been for a long time. And then you can start moving up the spectrum and it gets more and more complicated. And this is, this is already happening using these sort of AI algorithms, and that won't stop, I think. So when we meet with our banking clients, they say, this AI discussion is very interesting, important, but let's not forget the impact it has on the people working for us. So it will be a big change of the roles for many people, and it will be a different skill set that will be required. And all of the banks want to be, or most of the banks at least, they want to be significantly smaller in headcount than they are today. So this means that if all of these things are true, then the algorithm will take more and more of the decisions, and there will be more of a monitoring role left for the employees.
Well, I think it's a little bit similar to the earlier argument, but if you look 20, 30 years ahead, and it's about systems making decisions, I think it's a lot about also legal responsibility in the case mistakes happen, right? I think if similar to discussion in autonomous driving, right? If an autonomously driving car causes an accident, who is it to be blamed? Is it the driver who sort of relied on the autonomous driving technology? Is it the programmer who programmed the code and made a mistake? Is it the hardware that did not get a signal from some kind of sensor? I think the same applies to our area here. As I said earlier, if you have a system, an AI system that helps you make credit decisions, and 5 years later I get the data and I can sort of show that systematically you have been discriminating against a certain race or a certain gender, then I guess I can go to court. And then the question is, who's now going to be blamed, and whose responsibility is it that somehow there was a legal violation? And I think whether this is going to really become a game changer in the sense of that it changes how we do business in finance, I think depends a lot on whether we're going to go down this route in terms of automated decision making. I think as long as these tools just provide new measures, extract new data from text documents, from voice recordings, just give us more input, and then a decision maker makes a decision, then I think it's going to be great. I personally would not call this a game changer. I think it's still going to be great innovation, but I think it's not going to be a game changer in terms of how we do business. But if we start making autonomous decisions, then I think, in my mind, it starts becoming a game changer. But I think that rests a lot on how we then deal with mistakes and who's actually going to be the responsible entity.
So I disagree a bit. Can I just quickly say why I disagree?
You're not supposed to agree too much.
So I think these decisions are already happening now. So I think that needs to be in the retail space is already happening, and I think that's that's the first point. The second point is, so we talk about these algorithms. There can be biases in them, and that I fully agree. But today we also have a lot of biases. So if you go into a branch and you say, I want to borrow money for my mortgage, no one can guarantee that if you go to another branch you will get the same decision. And you can use these tools to give you much more consistency, and you give much more fairness if you do it in the right way as well. So I think that's important. And most banks, so I think a big difference between these driverless cars and credit decisioning is it's one is life and death. I actually think that's a very big difference. And there are sort of processes in financial institution firms today for who is responsible for the decisions, and they have committees and they have sort of process around that, which I think would be applicable also in this sort of new world to a large extent at least.
And because I think that's an extremely important point for the adoption of this technology, and I think it comes back to this cost of mistake. Because, like you say, of course, in other industries, like you said already, these things are happening. But I mean, if I get a wrong playlist on my Spotify account, the cost of mistake is like one click, and then I take it away. If we roll out a system where there's a bias in there and we make the wrong credit decisions for a couple of thousand of customers, the cost of failure is very high, but still on a financial level. If self-driving cars are killing people, the level of acceptance is zero. I mean, every people are killing people every day with their cars, and nobody seems to bother a lot about that. But if one self-driving car is killing somebody, it's up in the press everywhere. And I think this is why, and that's not a technological problem. That's a problem of acceptance of cost of mistake for machines, and there the tolerance is extremely low, which is of course totally irrational behavior. Because I'm sure that cars would drive all of us in a safer way than all we do. But it's not accepted that cars are killing people. And then you have all this, the things you mentioned, who is then at the end of the day responsible. Now it's me as a person, and you can grab me. But if you have a long chain of people programming this stuff and all kinds of technology in there, it's hard to take somebody. But I think this will, and I think there you made a good point. I think here we have to see what is allowed, possible, and happening in other industries already today, and how will this merge over to other areas? And then when will we accept that machines also make mistakes and don't take this as a reason not to use it? Because of course I agree. I mean, today if you look at how we drive cars, how we take decisions about our health, about credits, I mean, this is not that's far away from a perfect match, which also makes the next problem if you try to create AI models that imitate human behavior. It's pretty tricky because you act differently than I do, and how should the machine now learn from you or from me? There's so much, if you take the humans, and that's why we didn't touch this point yet, but that's one of my favorite discussion points. What is actually human intelligence? I can have a long debate about that, about our intelligent behavior. And if you say that, okay, machines should become as good as humans, that's maybe a path we shouldn't go. So it can, thanks to your question, I think you can start a long, very ethical and pretty probably very philosophical discussion.
But actually, I just wanted to follow up exactly on this point, that I think I might have a different view on human intelligence in that respect, and I might agree with driving, but I think I'm pretty impressed by the abilities of the human brain, and I would still think that any artificial intelligence system is still far from being close to what humans can do. That does not mean that humans are not affected by biases and that we do stupid things regularly, but I'm also a proponent of saying that replacing human decision makers, again, depending on the cost of mistakes, but I think in the broader scheme, I completely agree. It's also a discussion about how we think about human intelligence. And I think historically this whole field has started out with this goal to replicate human brains. And I think much progress has been made, but it's still my understanding that there's still much that we don't know about the human brain and that it's still pretty amazing. So I think that's something that should not be completely overlooked.
Thank you. More questions? Okay. You need a mic.
Or I can speak up.
Hi, my name is...
I think it is.
My name is Stefan Johansson. I was curious about this data and algorithms. Do you think it will be a sort of competing algorithm in the future, or will it be uniformed, and that is all the decision support system will sort of provide the same kind of support? Assume that you're buying a stock, and then will everyone have a hint or buy or sell at the same moment and stuff like that, or will it be more, different algorithms will be competing with each other to create more diversity? I think it's a problem already with the humans that are thinking more or less, oh, those 10 are thinking this way, then I change my mind to think that way too. Will this further influence that type of behavior on a group level compared to the other ideal state that you have sort of competing systems, data, algorithms that actually create more diversity?
Yeah, will herd behavior increase?
So I think there's even nowadays there's some research on algorithmic trading, which is not necessarily artificial intelligence based, but just based on a broader class of algorithms, and that sometimes in certain situations these kind of trading behaviors do have negative impacts on stock markets, because somehow these algorithms tend to go all in the same direction at the worst possible points in time. I think in the long run, if you look into this area of artificial intelligence and related technologies, it seems to be a very, very broad area of many, many different degrees of freedom. So I think if we go down this route, and if those algorithms also in asset management and in stock trading, for example, start playing a bigger role, then I do not think that this is going to cause more herding, and that everybody's going to converge to basically one dominating algorithm. I think there's too many degrees of freedom and too much complexity that there's going to be, in a good sense, competition across these algorithms in terms of making the right predictions.
Okay, you have carefully avoided question number 3. Is Sweden at the forefront or lagging? When you read Swedish newspapers, I mean, it sounds like we are the best country in the world in implementing, but Swedish media tend to have a slight bias in that direction. So therefore we were curious to sort of, if you try to benchmark what is going on in Swedish financial sector compared to other European countries or whoever, sort of how do we measure up? Does anybody want to take that?
Maybe I can start. Well, no, I don't think so. The short answer. I think there's still this.
Sorry, you don't think that?
That Sweden is ahead.
Okay.
That was the question, right?
Sure.
And I think there's still this, 1998 view of Sweden as this IT nation. I think this is quite different, and it comes back to a point that I tried to make earlier about sort of, size matters in this area and having resources, and just the talent pool that isn't very large in Sweden. And if you look at the banks in Sweden, they are investing, but they're investing a lot. But you can't, compared to the major banks in Europe and US and Asia, it's just, it's very small investments. And we have a fintech space that for other markets, they find the fintechs in Sweden very attractive. But again, I'm very skeptic of the fintechs, to be honest, and I think most of them don't really understand how a bank works. They have a great algorithm, but they don't know how this should be applied. And there's one more reason I think the answer is no, and that is Sweden had Swedish banks in particular, they didn't have a lot of challenges during the financial crisis, while many European countries had, or banks in the European countries had, and they made a lot of big investments. They were forced by regulators to make huge investments in infrastructure and IT, and they are now very well positioned. And the Swedish banks are playing catch up, and they will take them a few years, I think, to get to the same level.
Well, let me try to challenge you a little bit, at least in the payments area. I mean, like when it comes to amounts of notes and coins in circulation and in using technology to change payments, Sweden is an outlier compared to most countries.
But that's not AI. That's IT 1998.
I have one.
I can try to sort of give our view on the. I do agree with you. I don't think that we are at the forefront, and I base that on phenomena that my fellow colleagues in other jurisdictions are seeing happening. But that being said, these phenomena are very much in the R&D sector of enterprises, and I do think it's a resource question. Quite a few very large international players are putting substantial resources into R&D projects. So I do think that we're in the forefront now. But when it comes to society and the adaptiveness that Sweden as a society might have, I do think they were very, very different place. I mean, we are the most cashless society on this planet by far, and I think that when technology reaches retail consumers and has an actual impact, that Sweden might be in a different place. So on R&D, AI, no. On actual implementations in near future on the market, maybe.
So maybe early adopters, but...
Well, more a society than the actual Swedish financial institutions.
Okay.
I think Sweden has a pretty good track record of embracing new technologies and having an adoption both in the society and also being able to deliver things like Swish and Bank ID and so on. But if we come to AI, I think it's of course a complicated area, but if there's one thing that I think is a big problem for the Swedish finance industry, it's the usage of cloud services. Because I think cloud is the key to make sense of this data, have it accessible, having the technology possibility of making algorithms. You were talking about sales tools that help people to use the data in the next meeting. There are, and if we just look at Office 365, all kinds of AI potential things in there that other companies are using, but the Swedish finance sector, for me, and I don't really understand this, is so reluctant doesn't dare to use this, which I think is hindering a lot of internal efficiency. I'm not talking about cloud, but especially if you look at the possibilities that, not talking about AI, but if you look at the possibilities with AI, I think this will be a big problem, especially if you see, and you were talking about that, how other big banks are going in there. I've been in a meeting with JP Morgan yesterday. I mean, they are like crazy betting on the cloud because they see all these internal efficiencies. They see the potential of using AI and emerging technologies based on that. And here I think this could really become a big problem. On the one hand, if we don't do it, on the other hand, if we do it, and this comes a little back to your point of economies of scale, because if you, in a smart way, use these big cloud providers, then you can use the scale of the Amazons, of the Microsofts, and so on. You don't have to be a big bank yourself. That's why I think there's really potential to use cloud, even as a smaller country and as smaller players, to make use of this technology. But for that, we need a much more open approach to cloud. Otherwise, we will not be able to take the benefits of this technology.
But just a quick follow-up question. So how do you think about security issues related to distributing data, proprietary algorithms through cloud services that are provided by third-party providers? So you kind of give those things out of the house, so to speak, in a virtual sense. Do you think this is a potential part of that problem? Is that something that could matter? like IT security,
Yeah, of course.
hacking,
Yeah.
lots of.
Yeah, but I mean, and this is of course, and this is maybe like you said. I think the self-esteem of companies is, of course, they always think that they can do things better than somebody else. And of course, if I talk to any IT security department of the big Swedish banks, they think they have the best IT security department. And then they don't really realize that Google and Microsoft have like 10, 20 times that many people that are doing this, maybe on a little bigger, better scale. So that's why I think this IT security thing is of course a topic. And then coming to the question, what kind of algorithms you use? I mean, you don't have to give everything away, but I think you should use the possibilities in there. Also coming to your, I think, very good graph of cost of failure. Of course, you can take some modules that are like baseline, standard, natural language processing. You don't have to do this yourself. This is a module that you can take from the big players. And then you have, of course, to build your own models around that, maybe in-house. And that's also coming to your point. I think there will be some competition in having the best algorithms and so on. But I think we have to be more open to use these economies of scale, and some of these black boxes that there are, but if there's no risk in using them, then I think we should do it and not trying to do everything ourselves, because this will not work.
Okay, we need to pass this microphone to the very end of the room. You should say, please, use the microphone.
You talk about AI being the introduction of a lot of internal improvement of internal processes. And you talk about the fact that the Swedish companies maybe lack in terms of scale to introduce AI and to participate in this revolution in a more meaningful way. So I'm wondering, how do you communicate to your managers internally and to your colleagues internally to introduce AI so that this change becomes a meaningful and long-term sustainable revolution in your process, instead of becoming something that's short-term and something that the company tries for a year or two and simply gives up quite quickly after?
Well, Thomas, I would say, to be honest, the maturity in AI is so low that people are not really expecting you to change everything. Like, I mean, we're having this discussion here now on this panel, but it's not that people expect to, maybe they expect it when they start dreaming, but it's not that this is, I mean, to be honest, like this, I think that the financial industry has a lot of other issues handling their IT stack, living up to regulations and so on, so that it's not that AI is on the absolutely top of the agenda. But on the other hand, of course, you have to deliver some first cases and show the value out of it. To explain that it's working, that it's safe, that we know how the algorithms work, that it's creating a value for the business side, and it's not just a hype fun thing that the IT guys are doing. I think you have to create these showcases to create internal credibility that you're able to understand and to handle this technology. And based on these first good cases, then you can convince your leadership team and say, okay, but now we should maybe try the next thing. And that's where we are at the moment. We delivered a really good first case, and now everybody jumps on us and wants to do this. So this was our internal way of selling and showing that we really can create value, and it's not just a fun thing to do.
I wanted to very quickly follow up, because it seems throughout the discussion I was a bit surprised with respect to my ex-ante expectations that sort of you were more saying that AI is still sort of at sort of infancy stage in the industry. So I was also wondering if for example, Sam, I think we talked about this in another context, like out of your financial services business, what do you think in percentage points? How big is AI as a in terms of as a topic, so to speak, in terms of project?
It's a big topic. So I agree. There are many other things up on the agenda, but AI is maybe not number 1 or 2, but it's up there. And I think there are many reasons for this. One reason is everyone else is doing it. I don't want to be the one not doing it, which I think is a big and real reason. I think another reason is banks, the ROE of banks are not what they used to be 10, 15 years ago. So there's pressure from the market, from investors, and from management to sort of be more efficient. There are demand from customers. They don't even want to have a relationship with the bank anymore. They want to have a relationship with an app. So we have Think today, which again I don't think is AI, but imagine a software solution in your phone that says, look, I've changed your mortgage today and I've saved you 2,000 crowns a year, and I moved around your assets and I optimized your debt a bit. So
Sounds good.
So yeah, I think it's high up on the agenda, and again, it also is a big workforce topic because it will, if you look at the people that will be needed in these organizations, I think that also will have to change.
Okay, we have 5 minutes to go. Maybe I give you a last kind of open question, but more visionary, sort of 10 years from now. When you read the tech enthusiasts like Brynjolfsson, McAfee or so, they say that you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, this will go on exponentially and change our lives and industries fundamentally. If you take 1 minute each of our last 5 minutes, where do you think the technological revolution, if I can use that language, where will that have taken the financial sector? Michael.
I always love those kind of open-ended philosophical questions for the last 5 minutes. Okay, so in general, I think I'm more of a skeptic that AI is gonna revolutionize both academic research and the industry. I think we're gonna see a lot of, I think as was said several times, I think we're gonna see big efforts and big investments in using that technology to come up with better measures to extract information from very complicated data structures, new ways of sort of creating, finding information that turns out to be relevant to make better decisions. But ultimately, I think the economic fundamentals and how the industry works will basically not change dramatically over the next 10 years.
I also think that at least for the next 10 years, AI still is this what we call a one-trick pony. I mean, AI is good in doing one specific thing, and that's why I also agree to your point. It's not able to match the complexity of the human brain or human intelligence. So but I think we're still at the first steps of understanding these one-trick ponies, and not only testing with them. And of course, every company is having tests and POCs with AI, but really put them into production and make some real effect on it. I think this is what we will see during the next 10 years. And there, I think, like I said before, the bigger effects we will see internally within the companies. And of course, there will be some new applications coming out to the end users. But I also think that the basic fundamentals will not change that radically in the next 10 years.
Yeah, no, I think I sort of answered this with my Think 2.0 vision. But no, if you look 10 years into the future, probably, revolution is a very strong word, but I think there's innovation in many other areas. So I think life will be easier for customers. Life will, people working in banks will have much better tools. But it's not only driven by AI; it's also driven by sort of other sort of innovation, like the best way to present information and interface, and owning the customer who owns the customer. Like talk about demand aggregators, where you have a lot of different suppliers, but you don't really see the suppliers. You just have one interface to all of these. So from an AI perspective, probably no. But from a user experience, I think we will see a lot of interesting things.
I think that we will in 10 years see it in sort of everyday retail consumer life. It will be investment advice, it will be a consumer credit decision being made. You might not be too fond of this, but I do think that we will see AI in automated supervisory activities, monitoring the financial sector at a more sort of efficient level. But I do think it will still be on as a support mechanism. There will still be board members and management teams making risk assessments, hopefully AI driven, but it will still be, at the end of the day, humans in control, not for every single decision, but the responsibility lies there.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a fair amount of agreement in the panel, more than I had thought maybe, and I think you really answered the questions we gave you in advance. So thank you very much for that, with a big applause, and thank you for coming.